Open your cerebral cortex and shift your lobes into upper beta phase, because you are going to have Bitcoin knowledge transmitted directly into your vestibulocochlear. Your host at Bitcoin Knowledge is Trace Mayer, an early Bitcoin advocate since it cost $0.25, but this is not intended to be investment advice. A doctor of jurisprudence, but this is definitely not legal advice. And an investor in core cryptocurrency infrastructure, including Armory, BitPay, Kraken, and Mitagio, but this is not a recommendation of those services. Here, you get fed via direct mind download with pure and free Bitcoin knowledge.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast. We have an excellent interview today with Bryan Bishop. He's a Bitcoin Core contributor under Kanzer is the username. Also worked at LedgerX, the swap execution facility, derivatives clearing organization, designated contract market, which, by the way, they opened Omni, so they're taking retail clients now instead of just the ECPs. And for the last 3 months, you've had a benefactor that has paid you to sit around and think about cold storage. So that sounds very exciting. So that's going to be the topic of our discussion. From all of your sitting around and thinking, what do we have to learn?
About cold storage, well, there's actually a lot of interesting ways that we can store coins that people haven't actually been doing yet. And I think that part of the reason for this is that a lot of developers like to focus on like consensus changes, and problems around private key management are maybe a little bit less sexy. A lot of the procedures you need to do to be really secure could be characterized as boring. So perhaps that's why it hasn't had as much attention.
Yeah, so what is an example of things that aren't widely used, but we could use to help increase our cold storage abilities?
Well, I mean, a very simple example is Shamir secret sharing. I guess simple is all relative. Shamir secret sharing isn't that widely used, but it's an excellent method for password recovery for a single user. And one of the things I like about it that isn't often proposed is that what you could do is you could have your shares stored in multiple locations, and then when you want to use your secret or rotate it, what you do is you at each location you have a new share that you put there when you take out the old share. And so once the full secret is assembled, you send it off to this new secret that is assembled by these new shares, so that you only reassemble the Shamir secret only once. And this is an important privacy and secrecy technique.
Yeah, so let's make this a little more concrete. In Armory, we actually implemented Shamir secret sharing with fragmented backups 5+ years ago. And so how it works is we create the seed, and then Shamir secret sharing, we create, say, 3 of 5 shares, and you need 3 out of the 5 in order to reconstitute the seed. So how, like, out of those 5 things, like, what would your plan look like? Like, what are we talking about here?
Well, what's interesting actually is that HTC has their blockchain phone, I suppose. It's focused on cryptocurrency, and they've implemented Shamir secret sharing. They call it social key recovery. So your various friends have one of the shares, and it goes through their software to reassemble when you call it in, basically. But this is interesting, though, because this is an alternative to multisig, and many people would argue that multisig is actually a better way to go, because with multisig, you bring transactions to each key, you sign them, and you never have to bring the keys together.
Well, now these are separate, though, right? Because you can actually do multisig and Shamir secret sharing at the same time.
Yeah, that's true. So each key could be a different Shamir secret, and they have different shares that are unrelated to the other keys in the multisig setup.
Yeah, that would be one way. Like, I'm thinking in Armory, we create a lockbox, and by creating the lockbox, we use the pub key. And the pub keys can come from different wallets, which have the seeds, and then those seeds are implemented via the fragmented backups. So we have fragmented backups with shares in order to get the seed of one of the keys. Each of the keys that makes up the lockbox would have its own seed, which is also fragmented backup. And so now we've got both multisig and Shamir secret sharing being implemented.
So one of the interesting things here that I think a lot of people miss with Shamir is that you can actually do large groups. So with Bitcoin multisig, you're limited. I mean, before SegWit, you were limited to 15 keys, and now it's a bit more, but still limited. With Shamir, you could do 30 of 50 if you wanted.
Right. Yeah. I think in Armory we do 12 of 12, and then we do, I think it's 7 or 9 on the fragmented backups. Haven't messed around with that lately, to be honest. So, but yeah, I mean, having these much larger sizes can be very useful for exchanges where we've got segregation of duties.
And also, as you increase the size of the Shamir share group requirements, you're not increasing the Bitcoin fees. So
yes, that's one of the things I like about using the fragmented backups is it appears as just a single sig from the outside, but you can have totally kind of in the offline way that you're implementing the plan. You can have a much more kind of complex setup.
So a company down in Austin, Texas called Unchained Capital recently released an open source library mainly for developers. It's a product called Hermit. And it's an air-gapped QR code only Bitcoin wallet based off of Shamir secret sharing. And what I really like about it, besides the QR code air-gap, meaning the only way you communicate with it is QR codes through the camera and the screen.
Which is totally awesome because with Armory, the USB was actually one of the biggest attack surfaces. Yeah. And so we looked into QR codes, but we couldn't get the data in the QR codes. It was just too much. And so we even looked at, in fact, I think somebody built where we could transfer via 3.5 millimeter audio cable, which has a much smaller attack surface.
It's possible that cameras might have improved, and maybe that's
maybe there's better resolution or like.
But what I really like about Hermit is this idea that when you type in the Shamir secret shares, it has a timeout and it deletes it after a few seconds. So that's like a really important thing, that if you are going to type in your secrets into a machine, you should make sure it gets deleted pretty promptly.
Yeah, which like Armory also does that. We delete and then rewrite over the RAM many times so that like
as you should.
So that it's nearly it becomes very, very difficult to like use liquid nitrogen to extract those private keys. Go ahead.
Well, that's actually one of the interesting reasons for the there's this, during my cold storage project, one of the interesting questions that arose was, do you use secure hardware, secure enclaves, or commodity laptops or commodity hardware?
That's kind of the third rail, isn't it? I suppose we'll get to that a little bit later. Let's start with this concept of vaults that you came up in your thinking, because this is going to feed into another discussion about keeping the hot wallet secure, and then of course that's going to feed into the larger discussion that becomes very applicable to even individuals of the secure enclave versus general purpose computer. So what is this idea with vaults?
So I'm actually not the originator of the idea of vaults. There were a number of other people that had proposed these ideas, even as far back as 2016, but unfortunately they required a hard fork, or at least a soft fork. And their idea was a vault was defined as a mechanism where you put Bitcoin into the vault, and then the only way that anyone could withdraw Bitcoin from the vault was if they withdraw it in a way where you had a clawback period. Now, unfortunately, to do that in Bitcoin on-chain in 2016, you would have had to have a hard fork or some kind of fork to implement a covenant opcode, which does not exist. So when I looked at this, I was thinking, well, what can I do that would be close enough? And I published a proposal recently and got picked up in the media for a technique where it was actually a little bit broken, but the secure version is where you can limit your total losses from a theft to 1% or even less of your total holdings, and it scales based off of how much fees you want to pay in on the Bitcoin transactions.
Okay, so how would that work? Because let's say we want to limit it to 1%. What's it actually look like?
So it's actually quite simple. It involves pre-signed transactions and deleting certain keys, and it's all in the proposal. But what it comes down to is that you're setting up a transaction that has one input with all your coins, or multiple inputs. I don't really care. But then there's, let's say you're limiting it to 1%. So there will be 100 outputs, each with 1% of your coins. And then each of these outputs has a certain script. The script is, all of them look identical. It's instant recovery flow, where you can send it back into a vault or into a deep or cold storage system. Or after a relative time lock delay, you're able to use some hotkey, which might be stolen by the attacker. And then for each of these 100 outputs, each of these relative time lock delays are increasing by 1 day each, or some other time period. So what this allows you to do is that if you observe that an attacker steals 1% of your funds, you know not to let the other 99% continue to go to that hotkey. And you can do that. You can have this at each point. So if at any point 1% is stolen, the remaining coins that have not been stolen, you can send to the recovery. Maybe it's to some deep cold storage vault where you have like 5 vaults all around the world and you have to go travel or something. That's probably better than losing all of your money. So I think this is pretty interesting.
Yeah, so we're talking about a script here where it would be send X Bitcoin to address A or the relative time lock.
Yes, that's right.
That's what the script's
right.
going to look like.
Yeah.
And how do we implement that with these hot wallets in order to increase the security of a hot wallet?
So this was another idea I came up with, although it's somewhat derivative. And I'll explain how in a moment. Basically, the idea is that I was looking at exchanges and how they get hacked, and I was philosophizing about this, and I was thinking, some exchanges are just very poorly built, but realistically, in the big ones, what happens when coins get stolen isn't that an attacker gets into the server and there's a private key just sitting there. What happens is the web server communicates with the signing server, and the signing server maybe checks withdrawal requests, and the attacker makes a withdrawal request, and the server happily signs because there's a withdrawal request, and then the attacker gets to steal all the coins. Well, I was thinking, one way that we could possibly make hot wallets more secure is by that very same script structure, which is that the signing server will only sign transactions that meet the following requirement. You don't have to check withdrawal requests. All you have to check is the output script on that transaction, and if it matches a certain template. And that template is, does the exchange have a clawback period where they can say, hey, this is wrong? And if it does, you can sign it happily. That's fine to sign. Because as long as the exchange is monitoring the blockchain, which they should all be doing, then they have this opportunity to recover stolen funds before they're really stolen.
Yeah, before there's kind of, you could say, final settlement with the transactions. Okay, so let's get to the really kind of the contentious part of the interview. Secure enclaves versus general purpose computing. So, I started Proof of Keys. We got the website proofofkeys.com. That generated a lot of discussion on securing your private keys, getting it off of exchanges, getting it off of third parties. A good learning experience for everybody. The thing I think we can learn from your 3 months of cold storage pondering is that we can always kind of learn more about how to competently handle our keys to the Bitcoin. I don't like secure enclaves for the most part with individuals. I think there are use cases with institutions, HSMs, things like that. But for the individual, I just really don't like the idea of secure enclaves. And I think we should be using general purpose computing if we want to be most secure. Change my mind.
Okay, that's interesting because I'm not sure I really believe in secure enclaves either. But
well, take the other side of the argument.
Certainly. No, in the interest of steel manning secure enclaves, the particular scenario that I really like secure enclaves for is the following. Is that it's a machine that is tamper evident, meaning that if someone tampers with it, It's also tamper resistant, meaning that if someone tampers with it, it deletes the secret. And that's really interesting to me because the problem in Bitcoin is, how do you know if someone has stolen your key? The only way to know that someone has stolen your key is if you observe them stealing your money, which by then it's already too late. So, okay, you have these online servers that'll sign anything maybe, but if an attacker physically goes to those servers and steals maybe it's a laptop in a data center just wired in a closet somewhere. If they steal the laptop, then they'll be able to sign anything and bypass those signing restrictions. But if it's a secure enclave where it has this tamper-resistant property, where if they try to tamper with it, it deletes the secret and it's just gone, then that would possibly mitigate that sort of attacker. Now, the problem, though, is that, as you've mentioned before, I mean, there are known attacks against computers where, like, if you have something in RAM, dunk it in liquid nitrogen, and you might get lucky and be able to recover the data. There's all sorts of chip decapping techniques using focused ion beams. I actually just bought one of those machines for a friend. He finally got it working. It's actually really cool.
Sounds like something from Star Trek.
It's awesome.
A focused ion beam.
Yeah, it is actually exactly that awesome. The idea is that you can use a 5 nanometer wide beam of ions to slowly remove atoms from the top of a microchip to decap it and then physically examine the circuits to be able to see either the data that is there or the logic that the circuit is implementing.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Right. And attackers have this technology as well. So you have to be able to resist this, I think. If you had a mechanism where if someone is using a focused ion beam to decap this chip or whatever, it deletes the secret, then I think that would be very valuable.
Okay, so let's get a little more practical than our ion beam. How about like a Trezor or a Ledger? We're talking about just an incredible amount of trust that we're placing in these types of secure enclaves. Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that you have to really think about when you're looking at hardware wallets like that, especially consumer hardware wallets, which, I mean, they're better than nothing, but maybe our standards should be a little higher than nothing. Like, in particular, what about supply chain issues? What about... you saw that Bloomberg article. You have a little piece of silicon that's like way smaller than a grain of rice, and it could totally compromise your entire key, your entire device, and all your keys. So, and that's assuming it's put on there maliciously. What if Trezor or Ledger are compromising your devices or compromising the way that you sign your keys or generate your keys on your devices?
Oh, I mean, I don't actually have an answer to you. I mean,
other than, yeah, that's a risk you're taking, and you're putting trust somewhere you might not necessarily should be putting trust. I
mean, one of the interesting things, I mean, really go and look at the track record for these products. I would say for a hardware wallet, what I'm most interested in at the moment is multi-sig support. If you have stellar multi-sig support on a hardware wallet, then I'm much more interested in it. There was a wonderful presentation.
Because then you can at least be using multiple different manufacturers.
That's right. Because heterogeneous hardware is very important. Yeah, from different suppliers. Yeah,
using a bad analogy, but part of the problem is the key space, right? Like if we're using secure enclaves, it really reduces the variability in the hardware that an attacker has to be competent with compromising.
Well, that's true as well. And in particular, how many different manufacturers of these secure enclaves are there really? And the answer is quite limited, actually. It'd be great if we had like an open source version of one where we had verifiable designs and anyone could make it or something, but that's not where we're at.
Yeah, so, this kind of... I do... to steelman the argument to use secure enclaves... Let's talk about like bearer Bitcoin. So my favorite product for this would be the OpenDime, and the OpenDime, and the Cold Card. These products, talking about whether the key's been compromised or not. Well, that's where you have to physically break the OpenDime. It's tamper resistant because it's under all of the different like goo that gets hardened. What do you think about that product?
So, there's an interesting version of this, and it's actually very related to tamper-resistant hardware. And the way that those systems usually work is that you have a mesh of wires, basically, and they do like capacitive sensing, but also electrical sensing of like open and closed circuits to generate random data. And that random data is your secret.
Yeah, because if Trezor or Ledger like screws up your random number generator or potentially compromises it, you don't even necessarily know that you've been attacked because they're attacking you through software, not hardware. So, and your keys are still compromised, and then as soon as Bitcoins get in there, they can sweep them.
So with this mesh, if you drill into it, you change it. So the secret is no longer there. That's the idea. That's what I think can be.
Yeah, and that's what Cold Card does. I mean, what OpenDime does. So, and I've interviewed Rodolfo about the OpenDime specifically because there is this use case for bearer Bitcoin. If you can trust the device that the private key is still uncompromised, Problem is like, how do you back it up, right?
How do you back it up? You definitely need backups. That's true.
Because these devices do fail.
Well, you could
destroyed.
You could do multi-sig bearer Bitcoin, maybe. Maybe that's the
wow. Yeah, I'll give that idea to Rodolfo. That would sure be something else. Have like 3 of 5 or 3 of 7 open dimes, and that way you effectively have backed up bearer Bitcoin.
It's like a limited mint coin where this is 5 in the collection, right? And you have to have all 5 to.
With these powers combined.
That's before my time.
Before you're not a Voltron fan.
I'm younger than that.
Wasn't that good? Yeah. So we're talking about secure enclaves versus the general purpose computing.
So let's go to the general purpose computing side. So one of the huge advantages there is that commodity hardware is cheap. There's all sorts of manufacturers. You can use really old machines to sign Bitcoin transactions. You can use really new machines if you want to.
Yeah, that's part of the reason nuclear launch codes are still on 8-inch disks, right? The attack surface is just a whole lot smaller. So what about what hardware do we like? I like the Purism laptop.
I'm actually not really ready to talk about hardware that I would endorse. I don't know. It's an interesting question. Really, like what I would look for is multi-sig support.
Yeah, but this is general purpose.
Interesting note. General purpose hardware.
Yeah,
that you're
general
in?
purpose computing.
Oh, the Purism
computers.
stuff would be nice. Yeah.
Purism would be good.
I mean, that'd be nice to look into. In general, I would like to focus on open source hardware. Built-in multi-sig support would be nice in terms of the hardware wallets.
Full disk encryption.
Full disk encryption would be nice.
For sure. Don't open your laptop in a library.
Tamper resistance, tamper evidence, that'd be nice. Speaking of, for hardware wallets, Michael Flaxman gave a really good interview to Stepan recently, and I highly recommend that. He went through a whole bunch of hardware wallets and personally evaluated a bunch of them and came up with some good recommendations. So that's a good resource.
So what are some other really good resources out there for cold storage? I like Glacier Protocol, just help people kind of get initiated.
Glacier Protocol is interesting, but my observation when reviewing it has always been that there seems to be a lot of steps in there that could have been automated with more software. I think that would be an interesting direction in the future.
Well, someone's got to write the software, and who's going to do it?
Sure.
It costs money.
Another interesting player that's shown up, though, is Square Crypto, and in particular their Sub-Zero project.
Oh, I'm not familiar at all with that.
Well, they have recently made an open source contribution to the community. It's their secure cold storage system. I kind of see it as another member of the same category that Glacier Protocol lives in. So.
Oh, okay. That could actually be very helpful. So you're saying that Jack's becoming a good Bitcoin citizen, contributing to the open source. And
honestly, they hired Steve, they hired Blue Matt. That's great. I think they're off to a great start. If they can replicate Chaincode Labs to any degree, that would be a massive success.
Yeah, and Matt's just so good at training new people. He just does such a great job at that, and I loved rubbing shoulders with him at the New York BitDevs whenever I'm there. So, yeah, that's great. So, we've kind of come to hit on all the major topics we wanted to talk about. Is there anything we failed to cover that you feel is important for everyone to kind of at least rise to their attention?
Well, for exchanges, I think that we should very strongly consider putting together an initiative to convince them to all do a single standard for signed withdrawal requests.
Yeah, so I raised this issue to Jesse over at Kraken like 5 years ago, right around when I put in the initial investment. It's very simple. When you create your account, you give them a public key, and whenever you want to make a withdrawal, or any account change for that matter, you have to sign the request with the private key of that public key. So they now have cryptographic proof that you wanted to make this change. Like, why haven't any exchanges done this? How easy would that be to implement on the software side?
Well, so there are some easy things that you could do to get that done. I wouldn't worry about Kraken doing it correctly, but for smaller exchanges, that's why we need the standard. Because what I would worry is that they keep the public key for the user in a database, connected to the web server. The attacker logs in and changes the public key to their own public key and says, yes, here's a signed withdrawal request matching the key.
Well, and that's why we use proof of existence to anchor into the blockchain, like what the public key is that's associated with our account, right?
Right. There's other techniques as well, such as have multiple backups, check the backups, make sure they're disconnected. It's actually similar to in Battlestar Galactica. The admiral was always no computers, no networked computers. Actually, that was his rule, because network computers were apparently evil, and that's what actually saved his skin in the end. But anyway.
Well, sometimes they need to be air gapped, and sometimes they don't. It depends on the use case, and you need to be wisely using the tools that you've got. Another thing that comes to mind, what about the PBST that got merged? What are kind of your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think it's great to have a standard for partially signed Bitcoin transactions, BIP 174. I think basically all of the wallets are going to be implementing this in the near future. So I think that's the way forward.
And, back to our secure enclave versus general purpose computer, how would this standard benefit that decision choice?
Well, so by having a standard for how to format these transactions, you can do two things. One is increase the number of features that the ecosystem can collaborate on and be compatible with. But also you can narrow down the security attack surface just a little bit by being sure that this is what this particular format is. Here's how you validate it. That's a huge step, and it leaves resources available to be done to secure the rest of the solution. So I think that's important.
Yeah, so thank you, Andrew Chow, for helping get that all shepherded through, and everyone else who worked on it. Well, I think that pretty much concludes our interview. What, other than what are you most excited about with Bitcoin? Is it dead yet?
No, Bitcoin isn't dead yet. No. I continue to think that Bitcoin is just a very strong challenge to the existing financial system. I continue to, even interacting with my own banks that I do business with, just personally, it's flabbergasting that these companies are able to compete at all in a market and survive. And just in the near future, they will not be able to compete anymore. Yeah, this is just ridiculous.
Just interacting with the banks and even the credit card companies, there's just so much brain damage. It's just, let's send a one-time code thing to your text message. Really? How secure do they think the security theater is?
So actually, that's one idea I was thinking about recently is SIM-porting insurance.
SIM-porting insurance. Well, we need to have the phone companies actually be able to be liable for their own negligence or maliciousness.
Someone won a lawsuit recently. Lost a lot of Bitcoin because of SIM-porting. He won a lawsuit against one of the big telecoms. So,
do you remember who? Because I think Michael Turpin lost his case. Or something.
I would double check that.
Oh, I should go take a look at that. Yeah. Anyways, I don't follow enough of the drama, I suppose. Anyways, yeah. So it's been a great interview. Thanks so much for taking the time to educate everybody about cold storage and some of your thoughts that have happened as you've been pondering about it.
Sure. No, it's fun. Great having me on. Thanks.
Well, we've had Bryan Bishop, Bitcoin Core contributor, former Ledger X, and been spending the last 3 months just pondering about cold storage and the ways to really implement it. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Be sure to get a copy of the free Bitcoin Guide at freebitcoinguide.com. Got a question or suggestion? Record your voice at bitcoin.kn. Don't be shy. To help the show, share bitcoin.kn with friends, post about it on Reddit, and otherwise spam the interwebs. Your iTunes comments and 5-star reviews are very important to us. Please continue tuning in to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast, where we release interviews with the top people in the Bitcoin world. Now take some choline and let that Bitcoin knowledge consolidate.